Hi, loves, and welcome to the With Love Always podcast, a podcast to help you live the life you were created for. We are your hosts and your friends, Bree
and Marissa,
and we're so grateful you're here.
We pray you listen and leave feeling more inspired, encouraged, and uplifted. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode. Today we are going to be talking about forgiveness. Extending forgiveness, fighting for forgiveness, all of the things. I want to just unpack what true forgiveness is and also what it is not, and why forgiveness is so important and why we feel so passionate about talking about forgiveness. And then, of course, just how to actually practically implement forgiveness into our lives, because hypothetically, it can seem really easy and it can seem like this really simple concept, but there's a lot of layers to it, and there's a lot we just kind of have to address within ourselves and just all of the emotions we have to process within that. So I feel like forgiveness is definitely just a piece of the equation. We just did an episode on confrontation, so that obviously is a component that can come after forgiveness, but there are so many other parts that we're excited to continue to talk about. But just for the sake of this episode, we're just going to be talking about forgiveness and why we think it is so important. So starting with just kind of an overarching lens of the framework for today and kind of even how we define forgiveness, I think it's something that's so hard to put into words, but just the things that are coming to mind are just truly releasing resentment. So just finding freedom within those feelings. I think just such a signal of when you need to forgive somebody is when you're feeling that feeling of resentment or bitterness or any form of just like anger, whether it's noticeable or not. I think it can just sit so dormant in our hearts, and we can just have this thing that just builds over time. So I think that is such a signal. But also defining forgiveness, I would say it's just canceling someone's debts in a way, canceling their emotional debts, canceling what they did to you and just erasing it. And that doesn't mean that you completely forget what happened. I think it's human to just remember and obviously use that as a piece of feedback for the future, but just truly canceling holding that over somebody. And then lastly, I really think of it as a heart posture. So it really is an opportunity for us to extend grace to somebody else. So it's this place that we have to be both like emotionally and spiritually so that we can just give somebody grace, whether they've earned it or not. We are choosing to forgive them. Mm-hmm. And so in this conversation, I really think that forgiveness, it's more about you and it has less to do with others, because you are choosing forgiveness for the sake of yourself. You want to find freedom. And obviously a beautiful byproduct of that is that the person is set free as well. But really we want you guys to experience the beauty and the freedom and just to be set free from those emotions. And then the last thing I just kind of wanted to mention to preface this conversation is we're going to be speaking through a biblical perspective. So that's kind of what I used to define forgiveness even. And just the verse that came to mind that's kind of creating the whole framework for this conversation is Ephesians 4, verse 31. And it says, "Get rid of all bitterness, rage and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you." And so we truly believe that everybody on this planet, every human being is worthy of extending and receiving forgiveness. Mm-hmm. So that is how we're going to be talking about kind of just this conversation. And we just really feel, I don't know, so passionate. I'm so excited to talk about forgiveness, but I want to just ask you how you would define forgiveness. And I know it can be so hard for some people, but I think for others, kind of easier to like brush things off our shoulder and just forgiveness is a natural extension. Is that something you feel like comes natural to you?
I would say at this point in my life, I do feel like forgiveness is something that comes natural. I think I'm quick to want to seek to forgive someone and quick to want to give that person compassion and grace and the benefit of the doubt, because I think I believe for myself, it feels way more exhausting to hold a grudge or to hold resentment or to carry the weight of frustration towards someone. And so I think I'm always very quick to, whether we've had a conversation yet or have not, to want to forgive that person before I've even addressed maybe what needs to be forgiven. So I will say now at this point in my life, I have developed and equipped myself with the tools and maturity to be quick to forgive. But actually thinking about this conversation and anticipating this conversation, it made me naturally reflect to when I was younger and in college and high school and middle school and, even younger than that. And I think actually when I was thinking deeply about it, I do not think I was quick to forgive at all. And I have mentioned this in previous episodes and will continue to mention this. I think I'm such a feeler and I'm so emotionally charged. And I think at younger ages, when I didn't know how to use my emotions for the benefit of like my good and use them in a beautiful way that could bless, I think I would use them as a way to harm, and they would harm me as well. And so when I was younger, I would definitely hold grudges forever and hold things against people and just allow one thing that happened to wound me 1,000 times over in my mind, even if someone already apologized with the sincerest of hearts. So I think it's definitely something that I've had to learn, and I'm grateful that because I've learned through the years, it is something that comes easier and quicker for me. But I would say in regards to how I define forgiveness, I think it's just truly releasing someone of what they have done and not allowing it to be something that is held continually against them. Kind of like how I was saying, when I was younger, I would replay the same scenario over and over again, 1,000 times over, as if the same act or the same words were, done over and over, like repeatedly, even if it only happened once. And I think for me, forgiveness is not erasing the memory of it, because we'll get into that deeper into this episode. Like, I think there is awareness of the way that someone has done harm towards you or has hurt you, but more so releasing yourself of that bitterness or that resentment or the opportunity to think less of someone because of something they did. And also having such overwhelming grace and compassion for someone, even in a moment that it may be undeserved, in my experience, is the utmost experience of extending forgiveness.
I love hearing that. I think it is such an evolution. And even for me, when I was reflecting on this, at first I was like, oh, forgiveness, like that can be something that's a little bit easier for me. But then I was actually starting to really dig into it. And although I think in like everyday forgiveness, like I think there's so many times we have to exercise it, I would say like 80% of the time it is really easy and it comes natural. And I'm someone who I love seeing the best in people. So I just naturally want to, like, I just feel that desire to forgive them, whether they ask for it or not. But I do think there have been people, and especially when somebody is like so close in your life and the wounding is so specific, and like in these specific circumstances I'm thinking of where there wasn't necessarily like closure or redemption, or like there wasn't the opportunity for things to be made right. I think there just is this pain that I let just drag on longer than need it to be, just because I was not able to fully recognize and understand what true forgiveness looks like, because I didn't really have to exercise it in that complexity. So I just want to say, like, we want to acknowledge that forgiveness can be really hard. And there are moments where, or even people that it might not feel as hard, maybe because like they've extended a lot of grace to you, or maybe it just feels like a minor thing that when they ask for forgiveness, you've already forgotten about it. But there are going to just inevitably be scenarios in which forgiveness is going to feel very challenging. And I believe that sometimes we personally have to fight against our emotions and our inclination to choose forgiveness despite the circumstances of the situation. And like we kind of mentioned, choosing forgiveness even when somebody maybe in our sense feels like they don't deserve it or they haven't apologized, we still choose forgiveness for the sake of ourselves, if nothing else. And so, yeah, I think forgiveness is so layered, and I really think it can be such a journey sometimes. And I think two things I've really noticed with forgiveness is that it takes vulnerability. It takes me acknowledging that somebody else is capable of hurting me, and that is hard to admit. It's hard to admit that somebody could have that kind of control over me. And it also takes humility to recognize that I am going to, despite how they are or are not, despite whether or not they've changed or owned up to what they've done wrong, I am going to humble myself and choose to forgive them, because that is something I've just decided. We've decided that we are going to forgive people regardless of the circumstance or scenario. And so it really just takes you coming before and being so humble. And so, yeah, forgiveness can be really challenging, and we really just empathize that there are situations we don't know about that you could be going through in which it can feel like it takes a long time, and sometimes it really might. Like, that might be something you have to work through with a counselor or, I don't know, a dear loved one that can really just walk you through this, and it could really take some time. But yeah, we just kind of wanted to preface that we understand this conversation can be really challenging because we don't know the circumstances in which we're speaking into. And part of that, I also wanted to make it clear that there are a lot of things I think forgiveness can get umbrellaed under, if that makes sense. Like, I think we just want to be so careful with our words. When we say everybody is worthy of forgiveness, that doesn't mean that everybody is worthy of remaining in your life. So there are times in which we have to forgive people for very awful things. And sometimes those things are a signal that that person is no longer safe, or they're no longer somebody that we can rebuild trust or that we should keep in our life. And so, yeah, I kind of wanted to hear your perspective on how can we exercise forgiveness but still make sure that we are protecting ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. And that's where it can really just get so complex. Just as we were saying, it like the scope of what you may be forgiving could be so separate than the experiences that we have. And we want to be so mindful of that. But I can think of instances in my life in which, I've chosen to forgive a friend or someone in my life for wrongdoing against me. And though they are absolutely released from that wrongdoing and my heart has extended the utmost compassion towards them, I also have been equally as aware that that does not equal the presence of this person in my life. I think the discernment and forgiveness can both coexist, and the decision to withdraw from a person as well as forgive them and the removal of them in your life can also exist. And that is not to say it's because you love them any less, and maybe it is in some circumstances, but it's also that you love yourself enough to release yourself of the feelings of anger and hurt and harm, and release that person of the ability to have a stronghold on your life. And equally in response, give yourself permission to take a step back and be made aware that you also love yourself enough to not give someone permission to cause the stronghold of anger, frustration, hurt, or harm in your life. And that is where there is that opportunity to forgive and release, but also protect and remain safe. Whether it's something small with a friend, of just a friend who's not capable or able to just love you in the ways that you deserve, or, whether trust has been betrayed or whatever the circumstances have been. I know in my life, when I have chosen to forgive and let go and release, it's truthfully been on behalf of myself, because I don't want to give anyone the opportunity to have this portion of my mind or this portion of my heart or this portion of my emotions or my spirit. I want to be so washed clean of the circumstance, and I want to be so released and let go, but also equally in response, give myself the permission to protect and, withdraw and just remove from my life. And I think sometimes it's hard because we believe that forgiveness and removing people from our life can't coexist. I think so often when we hear, the discussion of one of the two, it's like this person did something so wrong in my life that, I hate them and that is why they're gone from my life. It's kind of opposing one another to say, like, I forgive this person enough that I'm withdrawing them from my life. But it is something that can coexist. And yeah, it's something that only you can be a true discernment of, depending on the circumstance or the topic that was at hand that needed to be forgiven.
Yeah, that was so beautifully put. It really is such a delicate line, and we just really want to make sure that as we're just being such proponents of forgiveness, that you still are so actively protecting yourself and being so wise, because the last thing we want is for somebody who is truly toxic or unsafe to remain in your life when they just shouldn't. Mm-hmm. And so something that I think will maybe help frame this a little more is also just distinguishing trust versus forgiveness, because again, they're just not the same thing. And so trust really has to do with future behavior, and it will likely take time to build or rebuild. And there's this really beautiful quote by a man named Rick Warren. He's an awesome pastor. And he says, if someone hurts you, you are commanded by God to forgive them immediately, but you are not expected to trust them immediately, and you are not expected to continue allowing them to hurt you. Mm-hmm. I think that just so clearly describes that in that moment, in that circumstance, before I even met this person that's capable of doing something in which I need to forgive them, I have already chosen that I am going to forgive them regardless, because that is a conscious choice I have made. However, I am still going to be so discerning and careful that in this situation, if something happens, I need to also protect myself, and somebody really needs to earn my trust. And so we just hope that that can provide freedom, knowing that just because you're going to forgive somebody does not mean you need to trust them. That is something you should absolutely take time to discern and just really decide if that is somebody you're going to continue to let remain in your life. Next, kind of just transitioning into why forgiveness matters. And I know we've touched on this already, and I think the two things that really come to mind for me is freedom. I just see forgiveness as being just truly, like you said, being washed clean. I want to be set free. I don't want to have these emotions or this pain that somebody has caused me. I don't want that to continue to remain in my life. I want to find freedom. And to me, forgiveness is just one of the first steps in doing so. And then the second part is also that I think it is just true forgiveness is such a beautiful depiction of the love that God has for us. Mm-hmm. I know that God has forgiven us for the things we do against him, for our sins. Mm-hmm. And he is just so willing to forgive me again and again. So I have first received forgiveness from God, and that allows me to extend forgiveness to other people. And it also really allows me to point people towards a love that is so beyond this world. Mm-hmm. I think it's just so powerful when we can come to somebody and they might even feel like they're not worthy of forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And we can say, I forgive you and you have been set free. And that is going to point them towards a God who is going to offer them the same thing, who is also capable of forgiving them and setting them free. And so I think it just is such a powerful depiction of love that is just beyond this world. And so that's why I get so excited when I think about forgiveness. But I also just want to hear your perspective on why forgiveness matters and how it can truly just lead to restoration in people's lives.
Yeah, I think I love what you said just about God, because I truly for us especially, like that is such a motive and that is such a model of the forgiveness we want to extend. It's a forgiveness that is not always earned or deserved, but is truly just the ultimate extension of love. And I know that in my life, when I love someone enough and I just like see their worth through the eyes of God, it really motivates me to want to forgive that person for their wrongdoings towards me. And I think ultimately, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, ultimately, whatever perspective or framework that you are approaching forgiveness, whatever situation or circumstance that comes to mind, whatever is the reason you were inclined to listen to this episode, I imagine it's because the presence of unforgiveness is existing in your life. And if that is true, ultimately what unforgiveness produces, it produces this attachment to someone that you likely do not want. It's producing this sense of control that someone has over your heart and your mind and your spirit. And it's producing the sense of resentment and this sense of anger and the sense of, distrust. All these emotions are being evoked. And ultimately, the beautiful benefit of forgiveness is that you do not have any sort of stronghold or bondage towards someone. Nobody has a control over you. Nobody can dictate how you feel. Nobody can steal your joy or steal your happiness or steal your emotions anymore. And that is such a motive to offer and extend forgiveness. So you are not in the bondage of anybody else. You are not at the control of anybody else for dictating how you feel in a present moment or how you walk into a room or how you show up as a person, because you're not giving someone permission to be the author of your emotions. And that is within itself such a huge motive to offer and extend forgiveness. And also, I believe like when we can extend that forgiveness and extend that undeserved grace and that undeserved compassion, it also does something within our own hearts that just like it grows our hearts of it is so against our flesh, it is so against our human nature to offer forgiveness that is undeserved. That is not a concept that honestly anybody talks about, and I think it's only a concept that we can speak on because we do believe in God and we have experienced that through the love God has extended us, which is so supernatural. But to offer someone forgiveness that they do not deserve or they have not earned, whether that is forgiveness within a conversation or forgiving someone silently in your heart or forgiving someone before you ever have a conversation towards someone, that is the ultimate act of love. And if anything else, it is such a beautiful benefit to you more than it is a benefit to the other person, because your heart and your compassion and your sense of just, I don't know, just really exercising that muscle, but more so growing your heart to size is like, it is such a beautiful experience that I don't feel like is ever touched on when we discuss forgiveness, but to just be a witness of like, wow, I literally don't know how I was capable of offering that kind of love to someone, but I was. It is such a beautiful experience to witness within yourself. And I think that is also such a beautiful motive to want to extend that forgiveness, because it also refines you and grows you and your capability to love and give love and receive love. And I think this might actually be such a relevant conversation for anyone who is dating or in a relationship, but something that I've recently encountered that I would love to share with you guys, because I feel like it could so resonate with anyone out there who's navigating the dating world or a new relationship or a friendship, whatever it may be. But I think something that is a recent form of forgiveness that I actually had to ask for forgiveness and also ask for forgiveness, but also receive forgiveness for is in my dating life. I was, I'm seeing someone right now, and we just kind of got into this conversation very recently about the past and just past relationships. And we were just kind of diving into it. And I had a moment where it upset me and I just felt, I don't know, threatened by it, to be so honest. And I ended up like kind of raising my voice and just getting a little frustrated. And I just, in that immediate moment, very quickly saw how it hurt him that I would get upset towards him when we were talking about this. And it was in that moment that I was like, oh man, I need to ask for forgiveness, because the way that I spoke was not just, and the way that I was upset was not, it wasn't reasoned. And I think in that moment, what it reminded me of was, one, that I need to ask for forgiveness because what I did was wrong, but also I need to ask for forgiveness because I need to release him of things that happened before I was in the picture. And I need to let go of things that were in the past that are not in the present, and they are not in the future to come between us. But I just realized, like, in that moment, how layered that was for me. In that moment, I was experiencing the fear of the thought of what had happened in the past, but also the thought of how that would affect the future. And though I was the one who was kind of in the wrong because I used a frustrated tone of voice, and I, was bringing up all these past things and not necessarily using it against him, but using it as a source to feel like it was affecting us in that moment, I realized, like, not only do I need to ask for forgiveness in this moment, but I just need to let go of the things that were out of my control before my presence was ever known. And I think that's such an example of forgiveness. And it was not a fun conversation to have by any means, but it was so releasing, because in that moment, I realized how desperately I needed to set myself free of the things that were out of my control, and how much I need to release him, release us of things that have happened that may seemingly could affect us, but I do not want to affect us. And so I think that's such a powerful example of forgiveness. And I feel like for anyone dating out there, I imagine that could be such a relevant pain point for you, for yourself. And I think something I was also reminded of in that moment and in that conversation that plays such a huge portion into forgiveness is that we are all ultimately not in control of what happened in the past, but we are in control of what happens in the present and in the future. And I think when forgiveness is a part of that, of releasing what has already happened, but also being discerning of what is happening in the present and allowing only that to be your judge and your discernment for how you are viewing this person, and only allowing that to affect the future, not bringing the past things into the future when it hasn't even touched the future yet, is such a motive to extend forgiveness, whether you're asking for it or receiving it. So yeah, that's a very relevant story for me.
Oh, I love that you shared that. That was so good, and that was so layered with just so many important reminders. And I think just one thing that stuck out, specifically with people that we are going to be doing life with for a long period of time, I think it's really easy just naturally, whether, again, it's a family member because they're in your life for a while, but even a friendship, a potential spouse, or a spouse, like, it's so easy to let these things build up over time. And I think when we do that, when we're not quick to forgive, we're actually holding the person back from growing into their future self. Because when we are so fixed on the past and so fixed on the imperfections, we don't allow the person to continue growing. And we can actually keep people that we love that are in our life, we can keep them stagnant because we're holding them to a previous version of themselves when they're trying so hard to grow out of that. And I think what's so beautiful about forgiveness is that it actually makes people better because we are calling them higher. We are being mature by first choosing to forgive regardless of the situation. And then we are allowing them in that moment to either repeat their past behaviors, or more importantly, to actually call them to be the person we desire for them to be. So if you have people that are close in your life, when you forgive them, you're not, I think, like, it almost feels like, is this okay? Because maybe I should hold them more accountable. I think actually we should just allow them to become the person that ultimately we know they want to be, which is a better version of themselves. And forgiving them is the first step to do that. So I love that you mentioned that because I think that's so important and something we're just going to have to continue to exercise. But that kind of brings me to, I guess, kind of a closing section of this conversation. And I was just trying to put into steps for all my people that are like me and they really need it broken down and to be super practical. Again, we're talking kind of about these like abstract emotions. And even for myself, I'm like, have I fully forgiven that person? Like, there are all these questions I'm now asking. And so I just kind of created 5 simple steps. Again, there are probably so many other resources from people and from online that you can also reference. But for me, here's what helps me when I think about forgiveness, especially when it's hard. And that is step 1, acknowledging the pain. So acknowledging that somebody hurt me. And this is, it's hard to do, but you know that if you need to forgive somebody, there is some pain that is attached to that. So just to truly identify what that pain point is. And number 2 is then to process that pain. This is the part that I think a lot of us get stuck at. We have the intention of wanting to forgive, but then we realize, oh, I actually need to feel the pain. Like, you actually need to feel the pain that caused you. And so for me, I just let myself feel all the emotions. I journal. I'll talk to somebody who is kind of removed from the situation and who I feel like is a very safe person to talk to. And I do that to just kind of verbally process, truly release everything so that I can just leave it in that moment in time. And then the third step, if I'm really struggling, this is where I remind myself of the forgiveness I have first received. Like we talked about, I remind myself of a God who is so compassionate and who just chooses to forgive me time and time again. And then number 4 is I release it. I just let it go. I let it be. I let it remain in the past. And I ask God for help if I'm really struggling. And also too, with this, I think it's important that once we release it, it is still so okay and so necessary to seek restoration. So you might still need to confront the person. You might need to talk to them, figure out how you can ensure this doesn't happen again. That's kind of where it becomes, I think, especially hard when you realize, okay, I actually need to put in the work. I need to continue to, whether it's setting boundaries or rebuilding trust, whatever that looks like, you somehow need to restore this piece that could really have been hurt in the process. And then lastly is just to let yourself fully heal. So just let yourself take that time. You might not feel like in an instant that the pain is gone, and that's okay. Sometimes it does take a little bit of time, but just to give yourself that permission to truly heal. And something I love to do that helps me, and again, this is so counterintuitive, but I've really seen it help me in my life, is I start to actually pray for the person that has wronged me. And I do that because it helps me not only see that person through the lens that God views them, but it just kind of extends my perspective from just how I'm feeling in that moment. And it just immediately allows me to realize and just kind of put to peace that my emotions are so small and my feelings in this are so small, and there's a much bigger thing at play. And I really just, I want to be set free, but ultimately I do desire for everyone in my life, whether they have good intentions or not. I really do want the best for them and I do love them. And so that is me choosing when it is so hard. I am just choosing to love them. So those are my 5 steps. I hope they're helpful. But yeah, I would love if you have anything else to kind of add with that.
Yeah, I think something that I always say and love to remind, myself, but also the person that I might be forgiving, is that ultimately love keeps no record of wrong. And so I think for myself, I know that I have been released and I know that I have forgiven properly when the thing that I'm asking for forgiveness for, or the thing that I'm forgiving, no longer harms me. I think I am such a witness of when unforgiveness persists in my heart, because I allow the circumstance to wound me not once, not twice, but 1,000 times over in my mind. And I know that I've encountered true forgiveness of someone else, or I've received forgiveness for myself when there is no record of that wrong anymore. It's not something playing on repeat in my mind anymore. It's not something I dwell on. It's not something I think back to. It's not something that I use against someone or use against myself. I know that forgiveness has truly existed and has truly taken a reign of the circumstance, of the situation, and of the person, when it is something that is washed clean from my mind. It's not something that, if the problem continues to persist or a similar circumstance comes up, I'm immediately turning back to the previous circumstance and using it as a weapon against that person. I'm allowing the new circumstance to be the new circumstance and the old to remain the old. And I think when I even verbally express that love keeps no record of wrong, like you were forgiven and you are deserving of forgiveness, whether I'm speaking that on behalf of myself to myself in response to something I've done wrong, or on behalf of someone else to someone else, it is the ultimate expression of that freedom. And I think is such a gauge as well to whether or not forgiveness has truly taken reign in your life and in your heart over a circumstance or over a person.
That's where I love that we have emotions. I think sometimes we can talk about in so many conversations like controlling your emotions, but also like in that, in what you were just kind of speaking on, I think emotions are such a great signal for if you've truly forgiven somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in my life, I've had such convicting moments because I think I instantly forgive that person. And I notice that deep down, there still is a sense of resentment or just these little feelings that can creep in. And I really think that's so important to just kind of remember in this conversation. And sometimes I have to go through that again. And I'm like, okay, maybe the pain was even more layered than I realized. And maybe I have to continue to forgive that person. And I think that is just such a journey and such a part of relationships. And even in this, I just really believe that we have to actively fight continually for restoration in our lives. I think we're just given so many reasons to walk away from people. And sometimes those are valid reasons, but there are so many people in our life that they've extended so much grace to us. And I want to do the same. And I want to continue to fight for the people in my life and continue to forgive them, because I think it can just be so powerful. The last thing I want to mention is that it really is such a heart posture. And so just despite circumstances and despite everything, it is something that if we can just remain from that place where we are eager to forgive, it becomes easier. And when I find myself struggling to forgive people, I just know that I need to kind of check in with myself and see what's going on. I feel like we didn't fully get to touch on this, but it is something that did just kind of come to mind, which is we get the privilege of extending forgiveness and receiving forgiveness, but I think sometimes we forget we also need to forgive ourselves. And I think some of us hold ourselves in bondage when we just don't need to. We almost think we need to receive forgiveness from somebody else in order to forgive ourselves. And that's just not true. I believe we can extend that to ourselves. And I believe that we are all worthy of also giving ourselves that forgiveness because we've received it from God. We've received it from Christ. And so we also can extend that to ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to remind you of that if you feel like you need to forgive yourself of some things, because I think we all do. But that is the conversation on forgiveness. I really pray it was so helpful for you guys. And now we're going to launch into Love Notes. Okay, for today's Love Notes, we are going to play Never Have I Ever. And I know sometimes people do, or they like hold up fingers. I feel like that's too tricky. I'm just going to try to keep track of how many things I have never done. So I'm going to read. I just have a few.
Okay, perfect.
First one is never have I ever broken a bone. And that is true. I have not.
I've never broken a bone either.
Oh, yay.
Never.
Some strong bone.
I know. We're protected.
The next one is never have I ever lived in another state, which also is true. So I'm up to 2.
I have lived in another state. I'm from Texas. Some of y'all know that. Some of y'all may not. But California, my second home state.
I will see if that ever changes. I kind of don't know. Okay, never have I ever been in a sorority. I have not.
I was in a sorority. I was in a Christian sorority.
That's what I couldn't fully remember, if it was a club or if it was a proper sorority. What it was.
It was a sorority, yeah. That's how I found Jesus in college.
That is so incredible.
Yeah.
Do you know, what's the, Kappa Alpha?
Well, I can't remember right now, which is so bad. I don't remember.
To be honest, they all sound the same to me.
I know.
I have no perception.
It's so bad that I don't remember. But it wasn't Greek, because it can't be Greek affiliated if it's faith-based. But it was considered. There's a Christian sorority and Christian fraternity, which is funny. I remember the Christian fraternity called Bucks, BYX. I don't remember what that's.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But I don't remember my sorority. But I was only in it for a year, and then I didn't continue forward. Not for any other reason than I just felt like it served the purpose in me, believing in God and coming to that and finding community. But yeah,
we'll look into it and get back to you guys. Okay, never have I ever spent the night on a boat. And I actually have, but it was a cruise ship, which... Are we going to count that as a boat?
I think it does count.
Okay.
I think it does.
So then I'll say I did, but I would love to do a sailboat or something.
I know, that'd be so cool. I don't know why in my heart I feel like I have, but in my mind, I definitely haven't. Maybe it's because I want to. I think that's so cool.
I could really see that for you. That makes sense. That's your goal for this year.
That's my goal. Let's spend a night on a boat.
Never have I ever been in love. I have been in love. I am in love.
I have never been in love. Not yet.
Never have I ever cut my own hair.
Oh, I have. Literally before our podcast.
Yes, story time.
Literally before our podcast cover shoot, I'm getting ready. I'm literally about to leave in 10 minutes. And I just have a moment where I'm I just want to try to cut bangs on myself. I don't know why I'm the way that I am. And I just took scissors to my hair and I just chopped my hair.
Had you ever had bangs before then? / cut your own hair?
Not that drastically. That was the first time I ever cut my hair that drastically. I would take scissors to the end of my hair and trim it.
Yeah.
But I think every girl's probably done that at some point. But that was the first time I was gonna severely cut my hair. So if I ever had bangs, it was maybe in middle school when it was the thing to have side swoop bangs. You remember?
Oh gosh, yeah.
But no, I just went for it. And with not cute, kitchen scissors, not actual proper hair scissors. So I don't know why I did that, but I loved them and it worked out.
That was so crazy. I just remember you're I cut my bangs and just showed up.
I know. It was very impulsive.
Yes. Also, another fun fact to that, my husband ended up redoing your bangs.
Yeah, he
properly them. So
I know. It was so funny. He brought out his proper hair scissors and then trimmed them up.
So I've actually never cut my own hair other than again, just tapering, but not properly. But during the pandemic, I had my husband color my hair, full balayage, and cut my hair, and the cut was rough, but the color was actually really good.
That's wild because you think it'd be the opposite.
Yeah.
The color is tricky.
And he's never done this. So this was just him looking up on YouTube. And I was really happy with the results. I would, if I needed to, I would have him do it again. But the cut, that was rough. I was I cannot wear my hair straight until I get it properly cut. It was not it. So, anyways. Lastly, never have I ever fallen asleep in public. I'm not going to count planes because I feel we all have planes or trains as in public. But have you ever fallen asleep?
I think aside from a plane or a train, no. I feel maybe at the airport, but that's still kind of the same.
Yeah, that was mine. I actually have a very distinct memory. I was probably in middle school and we got to like the flight so early, or it got delayed. For some reason, we were going to be there for like 5 hours. And my parents proceeded to leave me. Like, I swear we were waiting and I fell asleep and they like left me. Granted, it was like a super small airport and they weren't far, but I just remember waking up and no one was around, and I felt so, it was like the worst feeling ever, because I was like something about the thought of, oh my gosh, I just was asleep in public. And then and it was like empty when I fell asleep, and then it was like full of people, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know, I felt so uncomfortable that all of these people had just watched me sleep. And yeah, I just am like, never again, never after that.
Oh my gosh, it's so funny.
But yeah, I've never like fallen asleep at the library or anything.
Oh no, me neither.
Have you ever fallen asleep like outside, like looking at the stars or something?
Maybe like in the sun, actually like on the beach.
Oh, like at the beach.
Think about that, but never by myself. That's so scary.
Yeah, I don't know why something about that is scary, but anyways, I got 4.
Okay. That you have done?
That I have done.
Okay. Oh wait, I got 3 that I have done.
So 3 and 4.
3 and 4. Well, thank you guys again for tuning in to today's episode. We pray as always that it encouraged you so much, and we can't wait to invite you into our next conversation.
Bye, guys. Thank you so much for listening. We pray this episode was encouraging and life-giving. If you found it valuable, please share it with a friend, leave a review, and subscribe.
And be sure to follow us along over on Instagram at With Love Always Podcast. Signing off with all of our love always, Bree
And Marissa.